This is the Ramana Maharshi 40 Verses on Reality Satsang, a time for self-reflection and self-inquiry. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. Welcome. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice. I bring this to this satsang. This week's reading from 40 Verses on Reality is verse 19. Only those who have no knowledge of the source of destiny and free will dispute as to which of them prevails. They that know the self as the one source of destiny and free will are free from both. Will they again get entangled in them? Cause and effect are for a body. If you are not a body, what effect can touch you? What can you cause? If you think you are a body, then you feel the effects of conditioning, of your tendencies, your habits. But even then, you have the freedom to choose. The desire rises based on the tendency, but you have the choice whether or not to follow that desire. That is why Shankara said, liberation comes to those who make effort. If you had no ability to choose, then how could you choose to make an effort? Hindus have a strong belief in karma. On one hand, this is just cause and effect. I act and the results naturally come. On the other hand, there are ideas of merit and demerit, punya and papa. Actions with merit bring happiness. Actions lacking merit bring unhappiness. If there were no choice, no free will, why should these ideas of karma and merit even exist? The self, however, is always free, unlimited, and unblemished. I heard a poem about choice once over the radio. This is it. You should praise your power to make choices. Saying nothing can be done denies the gifts that have been given. When you praise your power to make choices, you will receive your reward, which is more power for choosing. I feel as long as I can choose, I make choices that bring me towards inner peace. With my mind and body, I can choose to look towards that which has no mind and is bodiless. Om. Now to our videos for this week. First is Swami Sarvapriyananda, and he talks about free will. This is an excerpt from a longer talk.
So the subject that you have picked for this afternoon for the keynote address is the question of free will, which is a very interesting philosophical problem in world philosophy, in world religions. In fact, even today, at this day and age, if you look it up, you will find it's a hot topic in neuroscience and in the modern philosophy of mind and in many areas. So what is our take from the Sanatana Dharma? What is our perspective? So what I'm going to do now in the few minutes ahead is talk about what the problem is, what is the issue, and finally, what is our perspective on it. So free will is something that we all sort of intuitively feel that I can think of something and I can do it. I feel like if there's a cookie and I want to eat it, I can go ahead and eat it, or I may not eat it. I have the freedom to choose and act as I please. So this feeling that we all have, that we have some kind of freedom of choice and action, this is free will. What is the problem then? The problem is that this free will seems to be there and not there at the same time. We seem to be free, and yet if you look at it a little more closely, we seem not to be free. In fact, when you investigate this whole concept of free will, this whole phenomenon of free will, from a philosophical perspective, from a scientific perspective, and from a religious perspective, you begin to see that there may not be free will at all. What I mean by that is, for example, when you look back at the Bhagavad Gita, so Sri Krishna seems to be absolutely clear that there is free will when he says something like, Uddharet atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet. Lift yourself up by yourself. Do not degrade yourself by yourself. For the self is you yourself are your best friend, and you yourself are your worst enemy. And then he goes on to explain that when you use your free will to uplift yourself, when we develop ourselves and we grow to our potential, you are your own best friend. But when we do not do that, and we degenerate, we do not attain our potential, we become unhappy. So you are acting against yourself, as it were. You are your own worst enemy. So that seems to imply that there is free will. If there was no free will, how would we develop ourselves? Where is the question of telling us to do something if we're not free to do it? On the other hand, he also says in the Bhagavad Gita more than once, one conclusion that he draws again and again in the Bhagavad Gita is something like this. The 13th chapter, it goes, Prakrityeva karmani kriyamanani sarvasha yapashyati tathatmanam akattaram sapashyati. Nature alone does everything. We are deluded when we think we are doing something. The one who realizes this realizes that the self is not a doer. We actually do not do anything. We only think that we are doing something. The Lord controls everything, and we are like puppets on a machine. We are being whirled around by the will of the Lord. So which is it? Do we have free will or do we not have free will? The Gita seems to say both. Coming to our age, Swami Vivekananda, he exhorts us again and again. He says, arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Obviously, that means we have free will. Otherwise, how would you do any of that? At the same time, here's a quote I pulled up from the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. He says, as long as you are in the network of time, space, and causation, to say you're free is nonsense. Because in that network, all is under rigorous law, sequence, and consequence. Every thought you think is caused, every feeling has been caused. To say that the will is free is sheer nonsense. Will is caught in the network of Maya, and therefore free will is a misnomer. It means nothing, sheer nonsense. So is all this talk about freedom. Now, again and again, we find in the teachings of our scriptures, the teachings of the great saints, that we are not free. It's actually, we are entirely dependent on God's grace. So this is the problem, you see. So what do we make of all of this? what's the conclusion? A beautiful paper which I'll be happy to share through you if you like. Professor Arindam Chakravarti, who is a brilliant teacher of Indian philosophy, he is in the University of Hawaii now. He wrote a paper on free will and Sanatana Dharma and free will, so which I'm drawing the conclusion from. He actually quotes from Vivekananda. Vivekananda says, "From freedom we come, in bondage we exist, unto freedom we go." So the individual soul, we come from our real nature, which is Brahman, which is the absolute, which is infinite, free existence, consciousness, bliss. And we seem to be trapped in these bodies and minds, limited individualities with very limited freedom. So there is bondage, not much freedom. But ultimately we go to moksha. The goal of Hinduism, the goal of Sanatana Dharma, the goal of all Indian systems of thought is freedom. Moksha it literally means freedom. Nirvana, Kaivalya, all of the terms used in Indian philosophies, they all mean freedom. So what Vivekananda wants to say is that right now, the will may not be free because the will is subject to the laws of science and psychology and conditioning, but freedom is our real nature. So when we become enlightened, when we attain moksha, we go to freedom, not free will, but freedom. From a devotional perspective, what it means is we recognize that the feeling of freedom we have now, the free will which we feel now, is ultimately an illusion. But we must use this illusion of free will right now to the hilt. Otherwise, we will not attain the freedom, which is the goal. It sounds complicated, but actually it's pretty simple. It's basically what we do. When we use the kind of freedom available to us, which appears to be that we have some free will, we use it, and then we attain freedom where there is no more willing, there is no more will, but freedom is there. We attain oneness with God, we attain spiritual freedom, whatever you call it. And this Professor Arindam Chakravarti, he ends with a very beautiful conclusion. He says the best way to live, when we hear all this, that we have free will, but it seems to be an illusion, and ultimately there is freedom. The best way to live is to be aware that our so-called free will, this freedom is sort of borrowed from God, borrowed from that ultimate reality, and acknowledge that by surrendering to God. And that surrendering to God is not like becoming a slave or something else, because that God in Sanatana Dharma is our own higher self. It's like surrendering to your own higher self. Then the Gita, what Swami Vivekananda says, all of this becomes meaningful. That as the lower self, identified with body and mind, we do not have much freedom. But when we acknowledge our higher self and try to attain that, then we have freedom. So that Professor Arindam Chakravarti says, we live by salutation. Nama, he says. Nama literally means na mama, not mine. In the Hindu salutation in the temple, all the time we do namaskara. Namaste, namaskara, nama. It means not mine, not I. Thou, my Lord, not I. So this acknowledgement that it is God's will which is operating through everything, even appearing as my so-called free will, this acknowledgement is the wisest way of living. Do what you have to do, live the life you have to live with the consciousness that it is God's will or my higher self where this freedom is to be attained. Yeah, I think that about covers it all. And yeah.
All right. And now my teacher, Nome, talks about the most important freedom, the freedom from I and mine.
Being, which is the self, is innately free of any assumed individuality and its corollary, the illusion of possession, I-ness and mine-ness. It is the solitary reality, the sole existent self, And so there can be no question in that regarding the acquisition or loss of any kind of thing, mindness, or of any kind of particularization, I-ness. This is simply the truth regarding being, regarding the self, which from the point of view of illusory bondage is referred to as a state of liberation. In truth, the self is just as it is, always. Unborn, indestructible, undifferentiated. It eternally is as it is. And its changelessness is self-evident for anyone who inquires to know the self. So in the Upanishads it is stated that I-ness and mindness is samsara, the repetitive cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Such is bondage, while absence of such is liberation. The self, being changeless, does not alter its nature. It does not have the sense of I and mine at one time, and then is devoid of it at another time. The I notion, aham vritti, the assumption of existing as an individual for one's identity, is never true. And all that is claimed by the individual as being his own, as being real, such as my thoughts, my experience, my world, my objects, has the same degree of unreality, that is total, as the I itself. We should remain in the innate freedom, which is our peace, of the self. To remain free of the sense of mine, of possession, towards objects is known as detachment, paragya. This is straightforward enough, and anyone who knows, by discernment, the real source of happiness gains such detachment from all worldly things. But the Maharshi has stated in Who Am I, Vairagya and Jnana, knowledge, are one and the same. So there must be more to it. It is indicative of a complete absence of my thoughts, my body, my sensations, my world, and so forth and so on. How to eliminate the false sense of my. My rests on I. And according to whatever definition is given to I, the my part corresponds. The this aspect of one's so-called experience will always be the mirror image of the definition of the I. The object will always resemble the subject. So if the definition of I be a body, the misidentification with the body, I am the body conception, then the experience of the world will seem to be possessed by you. If you abandon the I am the body conception, then you find that you have risen above, you have transcended utterly the experience of the world. The this dissolves in the I dissolves in its original nature. What is truly you? What is truly yours? What is you must be you always. And if something is to be considered truly yours, it must be yours always. If it is something that comes and goes, it cannot be you, and it is not truly yours. The best you can say is you have borrowed it, but it's not yours. What is yours? In other words, what is you? Who are you? Inquiring like this, one abandons the misidentification with whatever is objective, which means with whatever has form and with whatever is changeful and non-eternal. For everything objective is changeful and transient and has a form, gross or subtle. That which is truly yours is that which is alone truly you. It is the unborn, uncreated existence, the undifferentiated existence, which is the undifferentiated consciousness. What is of the nature of Sat and Chit, being consciousness, is also of the nature of Ananda, bliss. Therefore, the Maharshi has taught that in order to recover the bliss that is always yours, you have only to know the being that is the real self that you always are. Therefore, true happiness is not a possession that we would get it or lose it, but rather it is in the very nature of being. There never is a time when you do not exist. There never will be a time when you cease to exist. The nature of that existence should be known as it is. In this lies immortal bliss and the supreme knowledge of the infinite consciousness. Just simply put the question to yourself, what is yours? Who are you? When the Maharshi advises us to inquire, for whom is this? It eliminates effectively the sense of possession, dissolving the object in the subject. And when he instructs us to inquire, who am I? Assuming we actually follow the instruction, then the eyeless true I alone remains, just as it alone has been existing. All trace of bondage is gone, because its cause, ignorance, has vanished. For misidentification was the core and only substance of ignorance. And that core is rootless, without substance, and merely imagined. Therefore, deeply inquire within yourself, who am I?
All right, now let us meditate for ourselves a little bit. Breathe in and breathe out. Long, slow breaths. Notice the breath come in. Feel it as it goes out. Notice that you exist and investigate within yourself. Did you begin? Your body began. Are you the body? Will you end? Is there a limit to your awareness, your consciousness that you can find? Or do you feel this unlimited awareness? Does anything ever touch this consciousness that you are? Is it free? Are you free? Who am I? All right, let's close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. This series on Ramana's 40 verses on reality will continue in the following weeks. If this satsang was of interest to you, I have more free book sites, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on screen next. Namaste.